Welcome to the No Bull Political Arena with your hosts, Sophia Nelson, Bill O'Reilly, Brian Mistro, and TJ McCormick. It's real voices, raw politics, and no bullshit. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the No Bull Political Arena. This is Brian Mistro. I'm here with Sophia Nelson and Bill O'Reilly, and we have a very special guest tonight. We've got Dr. Annie Andrews. And Annie, we've really been looking forward to this. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
So everybody wants to ask you some questions. I'm going to go ahead and start off with one of my biggest ones. So describe for us just a little bit some of your background, because I know a lot of people that will be watching this may not know some of your background. And then if you could add on to that, what made you want to run for the U.S. Senate? What made you wanted to get into politics? And hopefully that doesn't take up the whole 30 minutes because I know who you're running against. But I would love to hear for that. And please share with the audience a little bit of your background and so forth.
Happy to. So, my name is Dr. Annie Andrews. I am a practicing pediatrician and a mom of three school-age children. I decided to be a doctor when I was 4 years old. I never had an interest in politics. I was laser focused on achieving my goal of getting into medical school, becoming a pediatrician. And then I worked for 15 years at the Children's Hospital here in the Low Country of South Carolina, started my family, raising my kids. Really, like everything was going pretty well. And then the trajectory that I took into politics really has a couple of like key points. First and foremost, my youngest daughter was born 6 days before Donald Trump's election. So for me, watching the returns of that election, holding my newborn baby girl was really a wake up moment for me because I understood, this isn't quite the country, the world I thought I was bringing my daughters into specifically. And in that moment, I realized I was probably going to have to get more civically engaged in some way to fight for the country and the future that I believe that my children and all 73 million children in this country deserve. And then a couple years later, on February 14th, 2018, that was the date of the shooting at Parkland, at Marjorie
Yeah.
Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. I did not know anyone who was in the building or anyone who was shot and killed that day. Now some of the survivors are, friends and colleagues of mine, but that was the first mass school shooting I experienced as the parent of a school-age child, which is only
Wow.
a sentence a parent in America would ever dream of uttering. But my oldest daughter was in kindergarten that year, and in the days following that shooting, I felt really vulnerable and angry as a mother, and I was worried about my own child's safety in her classroom. And so I decided to get off the sidelines by joining Moms Demand Action. And I spent several years volunteering for that organization. And through that work, I started to understand the power of my voice as a mom in my community, but also as a pediatrician with expertise in advocacy and public health and child health. And the more I spent time in my state capital here in Columbia, South Carolina, the more I understood that we need more voices like mine at the table. We need voices who have a background in healthcare, in public health, voices who wake up every day and think about kids first and what's best for kids first, and just people who want to serve in office to actually solve problems. And so in 2021, I decided to run against Nancy Mace in South Carolina's first
Oh, one.
district. Learned a ton that first campaign and stayed really engaged in politics. And then after Trump got
You
reelected,
came back for more.
yeah, a little crazy maybe. And then when Trump got reelected and when RFK Jr. was nominated to lead HHS, that was the moment I was like, okay, I'm going to get involved this time. This is a really important opportunity for folks here in South Carolina with someone like Lindsey Graham on the ballot. We have to put our best foot forward. We need a strong candidate in this race. And so I decided to go back for more.
Well, I'm glad you did. I'm interesting you brought up the initial race for Nancy Mace. So that's South Carolina '01, and Joe
Mhm.
Cunningham was the last Democrat, I believe, won that 2018, if that's correct.
Yes.
Very close friend of mine. His name is Jim Rex. I don't know if you know Jim, Democrat. He was the last Democrat elected statewide office in South Carolina,
Mhm.
roughly
He ran
20
the
years
education
ago.
department, I think, right? He
He
ran the
did
education
the
department. Yeah,
what do they call it? It's the superintendent of education, I think is what they call it in South
Mhm.
that's
Carolina.
right. The
Mhm.
schools.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's a tough race. It's a tough state. What do you think in as you see right now the state of the country? What do you think is the ability for you to finally slip or flip South Carolina?
Yeah, so we are in an incredibly unique political moment, an incredibly unique political environment. All of the special election results that we've seen since November
Hmm.
2024 and the November 2025 elections in New Jersey and Virginia, and then the special elections in Tennessee 7 and Texas Senate District 9, and in Louisiana, and even here in South Carolina, where we've seen these double-digit swings to the left, really tells me that a big blue wave is coming, not because of any reason really other than the fact that Republicans have really lost themselves. The Republican Party is not what it used to be. It is not the party of my father and my grandfather. I'm not asking Republicans in South Carolina to abandon their party. Their party abandoned them. And the best way to get their party back to where we all need it to be so we can have a healthy two-party system is for the current version of the Republican Party to lose. And here we have an opportunity in South Carolina because Lindsey Graham is uniquely unpopular. His approval rating in South Carolina is 28%, which is
Mm.
10 points lower than Donald Trump's. We already have a poll that shows me just 6 points behind him. I have outraised him the past 2 quarters, and we have real people powered momentum because he's been in the US Senate for 23 years and he has changed his position on pretty much every single issue over that time period. If he was still the Lindsey Graham that was palling around with John McCain and Mitt Romney, I would not be in this race because I would agree that that's a pretty good representation for South Carolina. But he is not that man. He is now just following the loudest, most dangerous voice in the room, which is Donald Trump. And South Carolina deserves someone who wakes up every day and thinks about South Carolina first. And that is not who Lindsey Graham is.
Brian,
100%. Yes, go
may
ahead,
I
Sophia.
interject here? I agree with everything the good doctor's saying, and as someone who, spends a lot of her time down in that first district in South Carolina and loves the Palmetto State, I think that even if you go back to Nikki Haley, right? And you go back to the horrific events that happened in Charleston with the shooting in the church, and look at how South Carolinians comported themselves. That was really amazing to me. South Carolina has a mixed history when it comes to race, when it comes to a lot of things in this country dating back to the Civil War. And South Carolina really stepped up in that moment and showed itself to be part of what I call the New South, and to watch it regress this way that it has in like the last decade with, your governor and Lindsey Graham seems to have really lost himself. I go back to his quote about if we nominate Trump, it'll destroy the party and we'll deserve it, right? Boy, was he spot on.
Yep.
And so, with that in mind, what I'd like to ask you, because I think you set a good table, particularly as a female candidate, you're a doctor, so you are on top of healthcare, you have a family, you're doing something that I think is very unique for women of your generation, a little harder for women of my generation. I'm a little bit older than you. And, I look at Governor Spanberger here in Virginia and the governor of New Jersey, women that are married with kids, but they're still power women and they're holding high office. So I think that that's really exciting to me about your candidacy. But what I'd like to know is, given what's happening with the Epstein files and where we are with, I gotta tell you, Annie, I'm gonna try not to be emotional about this, but I've been horrified reading these files and understanding that there has been a systemic group of powerful men and tragically some women who are not only trafficking children and young girls and young ladies, but doing the most vile things we can't even talk about. What will you do in the US Senate? And will it be part of your campaign, particularly in a state like South Carolina, to stand up for these women? And what do you think should happen? How should this play out?
Everyone who's involved in the Epstein files, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, needs to see justice. I've thought a lot about this and my reaction to it. As a pediatrician, I'm a mandatory reporter. And that means that if I ever have
Mm.
suspicion that a child has been abused physically or sexually, I have to report it to the authorities. That's been a part of my career for 20 years. And I've seen horrific things, as has every practicing pediatrician. When you do that for your job, you start to protect yourself. You compartmentalize a little bit because you can't carry that all home every day, or you just couldn't carry on with your life. And so, when I'm thinking about the way I've reacted to what I've read in the Epstein files, I'm thinking about that protection, that self-protection I've used as a pediatrician so that I can compartmentalize it. It is deeply serious. It is deeply troubling. And what bothers me as a candidate in this race is that Lindsey Graham is doing everything he can to protect the people involved, to prevent the release of the fully unredacted Epstein files. He has said in local news interviews that, oh, if anything important was in there, surely we'd know it by now. I'm not worried about it. He is minimizing it. He is part of the problem. He is protecting pedophiles. So our choice in this race in South Carolina is a pedophile protector or a pediatrician.
That's so good. And just think he was a judge advocate, right? So he was a JAG officer, a lawyer. And again, looking at how his personality has literally changed. Like this is you can go back and pull clips. Lindsay used to be the moderate, good sense, Republican from South Carolina.
John
Yeah,
McCain.
yeah, but all those guys,
Man and
but
Robin.
he was
Yeah.
conservative, but he was always respectful and you could always count on him to be the voice of reason, to call a thing a thing. And watching all these people just turn like this, I mean, what do you think's going on there? What happened to Lindsey Graham? I mean, give us some insight into why you think South Carolina should send him packing, and will they?
I think power corrupts and money corrupts and greed corrupts. And he's been in the DC world for nearly 30 years now. And it's just gotten to him. And who knows if someone has something on him? People say that to me all the time. What does Trump have on him? And that's certainly possible that he's being blackmailed. He certainly acts like he's in a hostage situation when he's on Fox News or any cable news network. But he's just really lost his way. He's not in touch. When you work in Washington, D.C. for that long, you totally lose touch with your community. I don't think there's any more community connected job than being a public school teacher or a pediatrician, which is what I am. But he has totally lost connection with real people. When he champions the bill that's going to gut Medicaid, he's not thinking about the rural hospitals here in South Carolina that are going to close. He's not thinking about the pregnant women who are not going to be able to reach a delivery hospital in time to deliver their baby because he's just totally lost it. And to me, he's really the poster child of what has gone wrong with the Republican Party. And that's why this is such an important race because he thinks he's invincible, but he is not invincible. And when Lindsey Graham goes down at the hands of a mom and a pediatrician, that is going to send an incredibly powerful political message across this country and hopefully will help the Republican Party find themselves again so they can be part of this healthy two-party system that we've had for so long.
Brian,
It
last
does.
question, I
Go
promise.
ahead.
Last question. I'm gonna let you guys have at it.
Yep.
Uh, money. My friend Jamie Harrison ran, as you will
Mhm.
recall, a couple cycles ago, raised $50 million, lost handily. I agree the climate was very different then than
Mhm.
it is now, night and day. How much resources do you think you'll need, Annie, and will you be able to take him on TV, etc.?
I have to be able to take him on TV, or I'll never be able to win. If Lindsey Graham is defining who I am to the voters of South Carolina, I don't stand a chance. But the good news is, as I said, I think at the beginning, I've outraised him the past 2 quarters. We've raised over $5 million, and most of that was in
That's
the off
awesome.
year. Thank you. In the off year, before anybody's really paying attention to this race, before so many of these special elections, our fundraising momentum is growing every single day. You're right. Jamie Harrison, I think, had at the end of the day like $115 million.
It was
And
Mm.
unbelievable. It
there's
was
a point
unbelievable.
where like the ROI on the dollars spent just like gets you nothing,
Right.
especially in the media markets we have here in South Carolina. When I'm talking to my team, we're optimistic that we're going to have a 30, 40, $50 million kind of race, and we're going to
That's
need it to
good.
compete against Lindsey Graham. And I think we will get there because of the combination of factors, the political environment we're in, the person Lindsey Graham has become, and the kind of candidate that I am.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And doctor,
Awesome.
I was I was looking at the numbers in the race, and they are striking. I mean, I'm a Republican consultant in New York, and typically we're the Democrats for South Carolina. We're always, going 2.5 to 1, 2 to 1. The state is more than 2 to 1 Democrat. South Carolina is not that divided, but your race is strikingly close. You're within 4 or 6 points, depending on the polls. And I was really struck by Senator Graham's numbers and how many Republicans he is not attracting or are available. I mean, almost a quarter. Are there anything like one thing about Graham? I liked him in his McCain days, and then I didn't like him so much.
Mhm.
The one thing I've always liked about him was his foreign policy side, and that's a very important issue in South Carolina. A lot of military families.
Mhm.
Are you reaching out to the Republicans that Graham cannot get or has lost anywhere in this realm? Is there anywhere we can find common ground on the defense side?
Yes, absolutely. And I agree with your assessment of his position on foreign policy and sort of the past 20 years I've lived in South Carolina, the first 10, that's how I thought of him. As
Yes.
someone I mostly disagreed with on policy, but he was like a respected statesman who carried a lot of gravitas when it came to representing us on the international stage. But even just this week, we've seen the things he said in Israel, which is, he goes there to plan our future wars, and the reporting that was out of that meeting he had where he was just, people are really questioning what is wrong with Lindsey Graham. So the footing he had in the foreign policy arena, I think he's losing. He's become such many say he always has been, but he's such a warmonger. He's so eager to start new
Mhm.
wars, to talk about new violent conflicts, whether it's in Cuba or Greenland or Venezuela. He's so eager to have those conversations, and that is really turning off the far right wing of the party. He has two primary opponents, one of whom is supported by Tucker Carlson
Yep.
because of this warmongering aspect to his platform. I have several, former Republicans. General Patton's grandson has been a
Oh,
supporter of mine since I ran against Nancy
that's
Mace.
not bad.
No, that's not a bad place to start. But you're right, there's a lot of military families and there's a lot of retired military here in South Carolina. What I'm concerned about is these, disastrous budget cuts. I have friends and colleagues who work at the local VA, and I've heard what's happening there. The hiring freezes have caused them not to be able to hire the ancillary staff, the administrative staff, the nurses that you need to run a VA medical center. The doctors are doing the work that the administrative assistants should be doing. So doctors are leaving because their job satisfaction is plummeting, even though they want to work at the VA. So
Yep.
you can say one thing that you're a foreign policy statesman, but if you're not back at home supporting our military families and our veterans, then I think it's all just smoke and mirrors.
Gotcha.
I want to bring up something because it's a subject that Bill and I and Sophia, a number of us, talked on the show many times. And again, I'm no longer Republican. Unlike Bill, I didn't go back. I was like it left me permanently. Tariffs.
Mhm.
How have tariffs affected South Carolina? How has it affected your constituents? What's your view on them? Give us a little bit of insight. If you're as a U.S. senator, what are you going to do about the tariffs?
So, from where I sit, what the Trump administration has done with the tariffs, these sort of on again, off again tariffs, looks like they're playing political games with America's economy. And here in South Carolina, it's hitting us in the same ways it's hitting people all across the country, but also in some unique ways. The tariffs are directly responsible for some of continuing to be
Mhm.
high grocery prices on coffee and bananas. It's also really hurting the agricultural industry here in South Carolina. It's hurting the people who work at the ports where so many of these international products come in to be, driven all across the country. It's hurting our small business owners and some of the large corporations here. We have a big BMW plant and a
Mhm.
Michelin plant, and there's just so much uncertainty when you're a small business owner or when you're leading a large corporation. If you don't know what your manufacturing is going to cost because you don't know what these products are going to cost, it's really hard to plan. It's really hard to grow. I know of a lot of local small businesses here in the Low Country, in the Midlands, and in the Upstate that have just closed their doors because their margins just got so slim because it was costing too much to import products. So, I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be an economist, but I am a serious problem-solving, pragmatic person. And I understand that we have experts in this country that can help us determine our economic policy. And unfortunately, from where I'm sitting, none of those people currently work in the White House or in this administration.
And
Amen.
Doctor, from a human interest side, I mean,
Mhm.
you're a pediatrician and a mother. I don't mean this as a political question. I mean this is really as a human question. How does your life change when you jump into a race? Like you went from being a pediatrician and a young mom, and then you ran for Congress. Now you're running for U.S. Senate. I mean, I've worked in this field for a long time, so I'd love to hear just how day to day your life changes, like walking down the street, what
Mhm.
patients say to you, everything. I mean, it's such a
Mm.
striking difference, I would imagine.
Yeah, being in the public eye, I think, is the biggest change. I've always been a practicing doctor. That's all my children ever knew. So that comes a chaotic schedule. I'm on call this weekend. I'm working this evening. So they've never had like a normal 9 to 5 kind of mom. But the being under the public eye has been the biggest shift. And thankfully, my children have been mostly shielded from it. We don't really, have the TV on in the background. They
Yep.
watch
Mm.
Netflix and stuff when it is on. So they didn't see the attack ads when Nancy Mace was running them against me. But so I get to tell like the heartwarming part of it. So sometimes I'm out and about at the grocery store, or at the toy store, or at the park with one of my kids, and someone will come up to me and say, "Are you Dr. Andrews? Thank you
Mm.
so much for fighting for our
That's
kids.
great.
Thank you for what you're doing." And especially my son, I've got, girl, boy, girl. My son is the most sensitive one. And he several times will be walking out and he'll look at me and say, "Mom, I love when that happens because it makes me realize how lucky I am that you're my
Oh,
mother."
that's
Oh,
And
nice.
it's
wow.
like, but it's really hard.
Sweet
They're
boy.
like incredibly busy with their extracurricular activities, with their dance and their football and their soccer. And I miss so much of that. And I think that they just sort of understand that this is what I've committed to. I'm doing it
That's
for
right.
them. I'm doing it for kids. They understand that. But it is a huge sacrifice that I chose to make that impacts the three of them.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
watched it with candidates for decades, and it goes unappreciated just how much life
Yeah.
changes.
Yeah.
And that, I remember I had a candidate that once was the outsider, never in politics. We did the first stop to do shake hands at a train station, and the second we got out there, "You're a stupid politician. How dare you?" You know what
Mm.
I mean? She was
Wow.
Hmm.
a civilian 10 hours before, so it's a tricky life.
You
It
must have
is.
a wonderful husband. He must be wonderful.
Interestingly, I have a wonderful ex-husband.
Okay,
It's
there you
good.
go.
Which
Oh,
is
Even
working
better
out
if
way
that
better. I
works.
was married the first time I ran for office, and we got divorced a couple years ago. And he's an incredibly engaged co-parent, and it's actually working out really, really well. I also have
Great.
my parents, my Republican dad and my Democratic mom, who live right down the street, and I have a nanny. And all the moms in my neighborhood whose kids go to school with my kids, they all know what I'm doing. They saw me do it before. They're supportive. They bring my kids home from practice, and it's a village
Nice.
that supports me that allows me to do this.
That's
Nice.
nice.
you, I that is great. I understand too because all my family's from Texas, so I grew up in Texas, and my father's pure MAGA, and it always makes for interesting discussions when I go home, right? So you mentioned earlier that you're what +4 away from or -4 away from Lindsey Graham in the polling. One of the demographics in South Carolina that's been the fastest growing demographics has been Hispanics and Latinos.
Hmm.
From I think 2000 to 2019, they quadrupled in size, and they're now roughly 8 or 9%, I think, of the total population in South Carolina, and growing rapidly, growing over 6 or 8% a year.
Hmm.
Do you have an outreach to the Hispanics? That yeah, that number alone, in theory, could put you over the line, right? So, do you have an outreach to the Hispanics that because so many of them, as we've read repeatedly in the news, even Latinos and Hispanics that voted for Donald Trump are completely turned off with the Republican Party. What's your outreach to that demographic?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. That's what I'm seeing and hearing. We're planning to have, we're building out our political team right now. Our regional political directors, our coalition directors. I have a faith outreach director, and we plan to have a youth coalition builder and then a Hispanic coalition builder. Because you're right, like math is math.
Yes,
And
math.
that could be the constituency that gets me to where I need to be vote wise in this Democratic primary. I don't have a competitive primary, but I do have a primary. We're very focused on the Black voters here in South Carolina.
Sure.
South Carolina has, 25% of South Carolinians are Black. I spend about 2 Sundays a month at Black churches, and honestly, it's been really amazing. It's like
Yeah.
my therapy right now, and making a lot of connections within the Black community across the state. Although, I did a lot of work with that community as a very active child advocate, public health advocate, and
Mm.
gun violence prevention advocate before I was a politician.
Excellent. Yeah. Um, well, I guess my only other question that I have back to you is what do you think you've got to do to win this race? How are you going to win this race?
I have to raise the money to define to voters who I am. I think if every single voter in South Carolina knows who I am and is slightly tuned in to the current negatives on Lindsey Graham, I think I can win given the political environment. Jamie Harrison only lost by 10 points.
That's right.
So that's like a 5.1%, movement we need to see. We are really focused. When I talk to audiences of Democrats, I say, your job is not to go out and persuade your Republican friends to vote for me. Your job is to find every single one of your Democratic friends or your independent friends and make sure that they're registered to vote, that they know there's an election. 1.1 million people voted for Jamie Harrison in 2020. If 1.1 million people vote for me in November, I will win. The votes are there. We just have to mobilize them.
I
And
also think your dynamic is different, right? South Carolina, and African American getting elected statewide was going to be tough.
yep,
Tim
I mean,
Scott is a black Republican, which is a very different dynamic. And Nikki Haley gave him the push by appointing him to that seat, and then he had to run for it. And that's a good handoff if you can get it. And most African Americans never get that, particularly in the Deep South. But I think for you, you don't have the issue of race, you're going to deal with gender.
that's
And
right.
I think that, my question is, how much do you think the South has evolved on gender? We know that race is a mixed bag. And South Carolina is what, 30% black? Is it
Like
about?
25 to 30,
25?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what do you think about women and the gender role? How much are you gonna have to deal with that being a woman?
When I first got into the race, when I was calling donors, they'd say, well, is exactly what you said. Is the South ready to elect a woman statewide? And a good talking point back is the Nikki Haley factor. We elected Nikki Haley in a statewide race. And then Abigail Spanberger, Virginia
Mhm.
is technically the South. I know Northern Virginians
Texas.
don't
Yeah, we're
always
Yeah.
feel that
different.
way.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
right.
Uh, and I think the moment is different. And when I talked to Jamie Harrison, when I was weighing whether or not to get in this race, he said, I think it's a perfect opportunity for a white woman to run statewide in South Carolina. We all know the demographics that if white women voted in their own best interest, then Democrats would win elections up and down the ballot in every part of this country. I here am a suburban white woman with 3 children in the public school system. I'm at the carpool pickup line. I'm at the soccer field. I can appeal to those right-leaning, center-right, historically Republican white women, and they can identify with me and the things I'm fighting for. We saw that happen anecdotally when I ran for Congress. Obviously, it didn't play out in the
Oh,
numbers,
there was two
but we are,
women though running. Right. That's
yeah.
different.
So I just, I think we're past that point, honestly. And I think, what's up is down and what's down is up right now in American politics. And so I'm not particularly concerned about the gender thing because I do think that me running brings other moms into the political fray who would never, ever consider coming to a campaign event or getting involved in
I
a
agree.
campaign.
I
And,
agree.
Dr. Just last question for me. How do you deal with the voters that want to keep the Republican Senate, but they want to get rid of Lindsey Graham at the same time? Like, how do
Mm.
you talk to that demographic? Because that's a pretty good sliver there. I'd say, 10, 12%.
Yeah, I think that, that's a strategist question, I can
Yeah,
tell.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yep, that's what I would say to do. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, a sort of a flippant way to answer that question is the most effective way to get rid of Lindsey Graham is for some Republicans to help me knock him out, and then they can knock me out in 6 years, right?
Fair enough.
Like
Fair enough.
that,
Yep.
I mean, why not try that? And like I said, Lindsey's got these 2 primary opponents. They're going to be really mad when Lindsey ultimately wins his primary, which I'm quite certain he will. And maybe
Yep.
they'll stay home, or maybe they'll
And there's a
vote for
libertarian
me out
too.
of spite. Say that
There's a
again.
libertarian. Is there a libertarian too on the ballot? I th-
I'm not sure.
okay. I think I saw one out there, but I don't know if that person's
There
going
was
to
the
make it to the general.
libertarian, yeah.
Yeah, we'll see.
But
We'll
he's
see.
got
Yep.
2 well-funded Republican primary opponents, not as well-funded as he is, but with Tucker Carlson involved, like anything could happen. And Lindsey's going
Hmm.
to end up being drugged so far to the right during his primary, and I'm going to be able to continue presenting myself as just like the normal, intelligent, hardworking candidate that I am.
I
And
got a
he's going to have to then
question.
come back to the center and try to win back over those center-right voters. So I think there's a lot of ways we could build this coalition, but if there's Republicans interested in just being done with the Lindsey Graham era of politics, I welcome them to my side side, use me to knock him out, and then go after me the day after I get sworn in.
I
Annie,
love
Play a
it.
race to watch.
do you see yourself as a blue dog Democrat? Would you say you were a blue dog?
This is like such a cop-out answer, but as someone who just did not grow up in politics, I just really just like avoid all of those labels and the ideology. I'm just like laser focused on what's best for kids. And I really think every domestic issue, certainly, and most foreign policy issues can be boiled down to this side is better for kids than this side. And that is the way that I will vote. And then I have people at my events say, well, I'm not a kid. How does that help me? But without a doubt, what's good for kids is good for families, and what's good for families is good for our communities, and what's good for our communities is good for our economy, and then we all win. And at the end of the day, I'm just a serious, hard-working, problem-solving person who will use experts and data to inform the way I vote.
And
I
you're a
love
very
it.
good candidate.
Yes, you
Thank
are.
Really
you.
good candidate. Yeah, you are.
I know that we're going to close it out here, but I just want to say to the audience, if Iowa's in play, as I just read today, there's no way if she's +4 away from Lindsey Graham, uh, that state's in play, and especially in this election year, I don't know what's going to happen. It's
If you
the
catch a blue
overperformance.
wave, a real big blue tsunami, I think is a better word. I
I
think you could just get swept in.
I do. I think it's very, very likely. I wish you absolutely every bit of luck. Thank you
Absolutely.
for joining us. Folks, we're going to have at the very end of this, we'll put up a slide so that if you'd like to follow Dr. Annie Andrews on social media, if you'd like to donate to her, send her some questions, we'll make sure that you've got access to all of that. Thank you again, Dr. Andrews, for joining us. Folks, if you could please make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. It is at No Bull Media Group, as you see it right there, at No Bull Media Group on YouTube. Like it, drop us a question. We obviously answer a bunch of those questions. And thank you, everybody. Thank you again, Dr. Andrews, for joining us tonight.
Thank you
you.
for
Doc.
having me.
Thank you.